This is a continuation of a serialized publication that began a few years ago, where I delve into various discoveries made over time, exploring the circumstances surrounding them in a specific geographic region. The first three incidents will likely pique the interest of true crime enthusiasts, while the latter two might attract history buffs, as they relate to archaeology and paleontology. Today I present 5 shocking discoveries from the state of New York. On May 24, 1981, 2 children playing in an abandoned field in Linwood, Queens stumbled upon a human hand protruding from the ground. Despite the decomposition of the body, its clothing and personal belongings helped identify it as Alphonse Indelicato, a mob captain of the infamous Bonanno crime family, known by his nickname, Sonny Red. Rumors swirled that the children's discovery might have been staged to protect an informant who tipped off authorities about the remains. Nonetheless, Indelicato was one of 3 mafia captains riddled with bullets just 3 weeks prior in a crime later dubbed the 3 Capos murders. Despite extensive searches in 1981, the remains of the other 2 victims weren't found. It wasn't until 2004, after a major mob boss made a confession, that FBI agents, with the help of backhoe equipment, conducted another investigation in the same area. This time, they unearthed evidence that unraveled a 23-year-old mystery. On May 5, 1981, at a social club in Brooklyn, these 3 mafia captains, Dominic Trinchera, Philip Giacone, and Alphonse Indelicato, had been brutally murdered. Suspicions arose that they were scheming to take over leadership of the Bonanno family. Joseph Massino, the Bonanno family's boss, allegedly ordered their killings. However, it took more than 2 decades for the FBI to finally bring this murder case to trial. By 2004, former mob bosses testified that Massino not only ordered the killings but also orchestrated the concealment of the bodies with assistance from members of John Gotti's Gambino crime family. On July 30, 2004, Joseph Massino was convicted of murder charges. Unlike many mob bosses who adhered to a code of silence, Massino chose to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentencing. He confessed to his involvement in the killings and revealed the burial site of the bodies. Ironically, the same location where Alphonse, Sonny Red, Indelicato's remains had initially been found in 1981. In October 2004, the FBI returned to excavate the area and uncovered skeletal remains, a piece of skull, a jacket, a wristwatch, and a bank card dating back 23 years. 2 months later, DNA testing confirmed that the remains belonged to Dominic Trinchera and Philip Giacone. Despite decades underground, their skulls bore clearly visible bullet wounds that corroborated their violent deaths. The story begins with the mysterious disappearance of George Carroll, a Korean War veteran and father of 4, whose fate puzzled his family for decades. For years, Carroll family matriarch Dorothy Carroll shared a tale that young George had vanished under mysterious circumstances. While this narrative was accepted as fact by her children in their youth, they began questioning its validity as they grew older. In 1993, Dorothy sold the family home to her youngest son, Michael, but passed away a few years later in 1998. With her death, it seemed the truth behind George Carroll's strange disappearance might forever remain a mystery. Over the years, various theories were considered about what might have happened to him. One of the more morbid speculations was that George had been murdered and buried beneath the house. However, no substantial evidence supported this claim, and no thorough excavation was conducted. The family lived for years in the shadow of uncertainty. Rumors of strange occurrences and alleged paranormal activities within the house grew so persistent that Michael frequently hired psychiatrists and paranormal investigators to dig deeper into these claims. However, none of their efforts produced any conclusive answers. Years later, convinced by his own long-standing belief that his father's body was buried beneath the house, Michael initiated basement excavation. However, concerns about safety soon halted the effort. Tragically, Michael suffered a stroke shortly thereafter, forcing the project to a complete stop. It wasn't until 2018 that Michael's sons, Christopher and Michael Jr., decided to take matters into their own hands. They hired a ground-penetrating radar specialist who identified anomalies beneath the basement floor, prompting them to resume excavation. Months of careful digging culminated in a shocking discovery on October 30, 2018. Human remains encased in a concrete block were found buried 6 to 8 feet below the basement floor. Following this grim discovery, law enforcement began an investigation. The remains were sent for analysis, and DNA testing later confirmed, in December 2018, that the skeleton had belonged to George Carroll. The soldier-turned-family man had spent 57 years buried beneath his own home while his descendants unknowingly lived above him. Following this grim revelation, Michael Carroll admitted he was not surprised, as he had always believed his father was buried in the basement. Another family member, 62-year-old Steve Carroll, acknowledged that they had never filed a missing person report for George. In fact, police were unable to find any official record related to George's disappearance. However, the story didn't end there. Upon further investigation of the remains, police found fractures and signs of trauma on George's skull, suggesting he had likely been killed by a blunt force injury, a clear indication of possible foul play. A homicide investigation was promptly launched. Suspicion fell on one man, Richard Dars, Dorothy Carroll's second husband. Dorothy had married Dars after George's disappearance but divorced him in 1983. Dars later relocated to Mexico and eventually passed away in June 2018 in a nursing home in Laredo, Texas. Intriguingly, investigators couldn't directly tie him to the crime after all these years. Adding to the web of bizarre coincidences and unanswered questions is an unrelated incident from March 2004. A car crash occurred near New York's Northern State Parkway involving Jennifer Willis and her 3-year-old child. Miraculously, they escaped unharmed. During that period, new pieces of evidence began surfacing suggesting the timeline of George's death may have occurred before 1982. Highlighted by a vintage item found alongside the remains from 1974. One perplexing detail stood out. George's height at death was measured at an unusual 5 feet 1 inch. At first, investigators speculated the recovered skeleton could belong to a child. However, dental analysis ultimately determined that the remains were those of an adult male between 35 and 55 years old. The discovery of George Carroll's remains provided answers to some long-standing questions but raised many others about his untimely death, a mystery that may never be fully unraveled due to the passage of time and other unresolved factors surrounding this tragic case. A body was found within 30 miles of 2 racetracks, leading investigators to speculate that the deceased might have been a jockey. However, further investigation revealed no reports of missing jockeys in New York or New Jersey. Additionally, Paragon Oil Company confirmed that none of their employees matched the description of the deceased. In 2013, the case was reopened, but investigators remained puzzled as to how the body ended up at the location or whether foul play was involved. To aid in identification, a composite image of the deceased's face was digitally recreated from the skull and shared with the public for information. Initially, the medical examiner believed the individual to be a white male with dark skin, pronounced cheekbones, and black hair. However, by 2013, even this assumption could not be substantiated. A 1970s-era Afro-style comb was found in the deceased's pocket. This detail led investigators to represent his hair differently in the composite image, sometimes straight, other times curly. Senior investigator Thomas Hughes noted that the man's height might provide a key clue to his identity since his stature would place him among only 1% of men in North America. Despite these leads, 15 years after the body was found and nearly 35 years after the individual's death, the mystery of what came to be known as the members-only case remains unresolved. As of 2013, authorities reported that no dental records were available for the man, and DNA analysis had failed to produce definitive conclusions. From my own research, it seems there haven't been any updates since then. The last notable mention came from investigator Thomas Hughes's remarks in 2013, when law enforcement indicated they were focusing more intensely on Queensborough in their search for answers. An intriguing piece of related information dates back 4 years before Jennifer Willis discovered the unidentified body on the Northern State Parkway. At that time, another male body was found under eerily similar circumstances about 8 miles away in Dix Hills. That man's remains had also been wrapped in a plastic bag and left approximately 50 yards from a busy highway. Unlike the first case, he had died from 5 gunshot wounds to his head and body just 2 months before being found. His identity remains unknown to this day. These similarities have raised questions about whether a single perpetrator or group might have been active for decades. Shifting to an unrelated but fascinating story from New York, during the summer of 2010, construction workers uncovered a wooden ship buried 22 feet below ground at the former site of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. Upon analysis, it was determined to be a sloop, a type of ship used by Dutch traders during the 18th century for transporting goods and passengers through narrow waterways. Experts believe this vessel was likely built around the 1770s in Philadelphia. Evidence suggests that it may have been in use only briefly. Interestingly, wood from nearby areas was known to have been used in constructing iconic 18th century buildings such as Independence Hall. According to researchers like James Cook and his team, an analysis of tree rings in the wood indicated that the oldest rings dated back to 1400, while the youngest were from 1773. This indicates that the trees used for building the ship were likely harvested and repurposed immediately after felling. Following its discovery, the ship was preserved at Maryland Archaeological Conservation Laboratory and later sent to Texas A&M University for further conservation work. Both stories, one modern and chilling, the other ancient and enigmatic, reflect humanity's enduring fascination with untangling mysteries, whether they involve uncovering lost identities or piecing together forgotten history. Yet even with advanced tools at their disposal, investigators and researchers alike often find themselves staring into an abyss of unanswered questions. The mastodon, an extinct species of mammal, once roamed various regions of North and Central America. Distantly related to modern elephants, the mastodon is believed to have vanished approximately 10,000 to 11,000 years ago. In New York State, fossils of these ancient creatures have been unearthed over the decades, with one notable example being the nearly complete skeleton of the Harriman mastodon, discovered in 1952. This particular find occurred during a drainage ditch expansion project near Route 17M in the Harriman area of Orange County. Workers unearthed the skeleton while excavating shallow soil on land owned by Edith Lostron. Their equipment easily exposed parts of the jawbone, ribs, and other remains due to the shallow depth. Initially, these bones were taken to the Arden House in Harriman without significant attention. Later, some workers brought them home. A few days after the find, a local newspaper, the Warwick Dispatch, published a report about the discovery. The news quickly spread, drawing the attention of W. E. Fisher, a specialist from the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Fisher conducted further excavations at the site. The dig attracted crowds of local residents and children, leading to some chaos as spectators attempted to collect souvenirs. In several instances, small bones were spirited away and later had to be recovered. Excavations dug as deep as 4 feet into the ground and succeeded in recovering a nearly intact mastodon skeleton. In his 1957 book, R. W. Smith explained why this specimen had been so well preserved. He suggested that during the last ice age, glacial movements likely displaced many mastodon remains across the region. However, this particular mastodon appeared to have died in a low-lying area surrounded by elevated terrain, which may have shielded its remains from being swept away by melting glaciers. As a result, its skeleton was found in remarkably good condition. Today, this reconstructed mastodon skeleton is displayed at the Museum Village in Monroe, Orange County. Originally showcased at the American Museum of Natural History, it was later moved to its current location. The impressive specimen stands about 8 feet tall and spans 13 feet wide, offering visitors a rare glimpse into the prehistoric past.